Scott Pilgrim is an interesting case study, clearly being a popular IP and yet was a flop of a movie when it was brought into live action in 2010. And yet, you couldn't call this movie unpopular now, since it's garnered a cult following years past the initial opening weekend. It is one of the most unique comic book movies out there and one of the most Edgar Wright projects. Somehow placed so separately to the usual slew of comic book productions that it stands out in its own bubble with somewhat of the success of its peers, if not more, yet not quite with the finances to back it up. But what it does have is a trait that is, in this genre, diminishing more and more, is a heck of a lot of heart. This movie comes off as a passion project through and through, and it only becomes more clear as the shocking fan service pipe dream is actually coming true with Scott Pilgrim, the anime. Look at all this, it's Scott Pilgrim animated. And not only that, it is a direct homage to Brian Lee O'Malley's graphic novel design. Practically perfect in representation, exactly as one would hope the Scott Pilgrim story would be told. Of course, Edgar Wright probably was the best stylistic option in the live-action style, but he's not been left in the dust either, as he's strapped into this project just the same as executive producer. And he's been drip-feeding details on Twitter over the past year. And it doesn't end there. Clearly the general vibe and work atmosphere of the 2010 live-action production was just fantastic, as practically everybody has returned. We always heard of little details about the close-knit connection of the cast behind the scenes, but it's clear that the bond has not even come close to severing 13 years later. And though there are examples of some cast not being announced yet, apparently there's more to come. And never before have we really seen a full re-adaptation take place with all of the same casting choices there as well. Truly, it's a great timeline for a Scott Pilgrim fan. So, okay, that's great. All your typical castings are in place. No matter their placement or past, all are happy to meet back on these grounds. But what more is there to know about this project? Well, all sorts of details. This is not just a redo of the 2010 movie. In fact, it's not a movie at all. Being helmed as a Netflix project, and the fact that this is an anime, this will be a series instead, expanding out supposedly into 8 episodes. Whether that's 30 minutes a pop or Netflix's 50-minute runtime is yet to be seen, but at the lower end, that's still 4 hours of content, i.e. double the classic runtime, or pushing way up to 6.5 on the upper echelon. This is more than a re-adaptation, this is a remastering. And Edgar Wright, Brian Lee O'Malley, and Ben David Grabinski, showrunner to this new series, have confirmed this. With Wright noting that it expands the Scott Pilgrim universe, presumably more so than just highlighting the graphic novel details, but into new territory too. Whilst the other two stated that when they began writing Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, they wanted to capture the spirit of the movies and the comics, but still update things in the near 2 decades since the comic's original publication. What that means in reality, we don't really know for certain, but 2 examples have been given. For one, we'll be deep diving a little more into the backstories for the Evil X's, giving them more development and expanding their stories, as well as another change we can actually catch in the current teasers.
Got a job delivering DVDs for Netflix.
DVDs for Netflix.
I'm like her only friend in...
Yeah, Ramona no longer works for Amazon Delivery and instead delivers Netflix DVDs. And even with just this small change in the scripting, it can have a domino effect into the format of some of the jokes, sprinkling a little more quipping in places when discussing the options for DVD choices, for example.
Ooh, the game is over too! It's over a second time! That sounds fun!
More changes can be felt in just the delivery of some of our characters too. Since we're in a new format, the more monotonal tones of Michael Cera's Scott doesn't really fit too well in this more colourful style. I hear it was people's biggest concerns when first learning of the same casting, but in this remaster, Cera's decided to anime up his voice a little bit, and he sounds fantastic. To not hear Cera as just doing his normal voice again is a great relief, and honestly, I'd love to hear more of his voice acting work if he took on more of a varied approach like this in the future. And he's not the only one, though it's a little more subtle in these other cases. Aubrey Plaza and Kevin Culkin have also elevated their voice work to emphasize the traits of Julian Wallace, just making it more cartoony, bringing Scott Pilgrim into the best it can be. But let's talk more about the animation, since it's more than just a homage and a media format. This time around, the animation production studio behind Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is none other than Science Saru. Perhaps not quite one of the supermassive anime studios you may memorize if you're into anime, but their past work is still pretty prevalent. They tackled 2 episodes of Star Wars Visions, both Akakiri and Toby, as well as Japan Sinks 2020, which is a fantastic and gut-wrenching tale surrounded by a natural disaster. They are also the team behind Devilman Crybaby, Space Dandy, and Ping Pong the Animation, which was certainly a choice, though I hear that series is fantastic. And yeah, that's just their series. They do movies too. Most fitting to the Scott Pilgrim readaptation is probably Toby, which was directed by Abel Gongora, who is also helming the direction behind this project. And already there are some great stylistic choices we can see behind the visions of Takes Off. Take for example, the blurring effect. Another production taking a note from the Spider-Verse's work, all blurring has a particular and unique effect to it. And in the universe of Scott Pilgrim, it comes in the form of a lens aberration of sorts. Again, likely a homage to the printing style of the graphic novel of which the story originates from. Brilliant! You got other elements in there as well, like an animated dolly zoom effect and match cutting similarly to the live-action Wright production, and in general, the style being harked upon is a monumentally influential one in the first place. The style of the Scott Pilgrim graphic novel supposedly was given a whole label for its design as Cal Arts. Or it's more like the term gained popularity as a way to lump in a repetitive animation design that cartoons started picking up on. But Scott Pilgrim was one of the first, and very much helped to solidify the idea of what that style looks like. It's the kind that's behind Gravity Falls and Steven Universe, and if the Scott Pilgrim look did inspire them, then choosing to homage back to it is quite the big shoes to fill, in animated form. This is your mid-vid plug to subscribe if you're up for hearing more animation news and my thoughts on them. And also a request, tell me what kind of news you'd like me to cover over on our Discord server. This Netflix news, for example, just completely snuck up on me from that latest trailer drop. Or you could also check us out on TikTok if you want to see some side content, like debating which Toy Story duo would win in a battle royale. Weird prompt, I know. I'm trying something. But anyway, I'll get you back to today's video. Enough about looks, what is this series actually gonna sound like? Well, we know a piece of the puzzle. Other than just the sound from the clips we have so far, we also have knowledge of who's providing some of the music. It's Amananaguchi. It's Amananaguchi, which are an American chiptune-based pop and rock band, fusing bit pop and traditional band instrumentation. Chiptune? In Scott Pilgrim? Where have we heard that before? It is, of course, the same people behind the soundtrack of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game. Really just setting up this whole series to be the perfect love letter to fans of Scott Pilgrim, liquidating all of its elements together into one big form. And considering for a time that Scott Pilgrim game was literally a piece of lost media, being unable to buy from any sources and unplayable on practically all consoles for a time unless you had it bought or downloaded in advance, it sure is a renaissance of a resurgence for the IP. Been a tumultuous decade and a half, to say the least. But finally now, it's all coming together. If there's one word to define this new retelling, it's faithful. Through and through, faithful. And it just leaves me to wonder, how well will this project really do? Clearly this franchise is incredibly popular now. The cult following is here and still here. And we're finally getting the best version of the tale, retold with all the best elements blended together. Oddly feeling like a classical, old-school project we just missed a few years back. And I also wonder how well it'll be received if it brings on a whole bunch of new viewers. If it's at the forefront of Netflix, that's a lot of new attention brought onto it, and how well would they respond with their blind eyes? After all, the story ages weirdly, and that's the point. Scott Pilgrim is a bad person. The first thing we learn about him, other than his name, is that he's a 23-year-old dating a high schooler. Yikes. And Ramona too isn't a great person, and that's the point. These two characters are awful people, hopefully learning themselves how to be a little less awful than they were before. It's a lot of nuance I'll be curious to see how a new audience responds to, if they even see it. I mean, a major 2D production? That in itself is a bit of a risk against the far more standard 3D style showcased for the West. I wonder if that too is a disadvantage this project will have to face, and what on earth is the ending gonna be? Well, we'll be finding out awfully soon as this anime series releases in about 6 weeks' time on November 17th. A great wintry option to settle down with. And hopefully this time, It'll be a whole lot more successful than the live-action 2010 movie. But even if it's not, it's clear this project is surrounded by people who truly care about the story being told and have made solidified bonds along the way. This new anime has practically everything going for it for what it is, but at the core of it all is something that not many rivals can say for themselves. This movie has a heck of a lot of heart, and I look forward to seeing how it goes. My name's been Daz, you didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit.